Welcome to people from all over the world, people that I was speaking to as recently as a couple of hours ago that I hope are joining us for a really informative and interactive session as the Fortuna admissions team shares all of their expertise to talk about the 7 things you need to know about getting into the Stanford GSB. Now, when I asked my colleagues at Fortuna, what are the things that you should know about Stanford? There's so many more than 7, but we really wanted to drill down as we think about this year and the admissions cycle, everything that really will be invaluable for you to gain expertise to put together truly compelling applications that capture the very best of you. My name is Matt Simmons. I am a co-director at Fortuna. I write about Stanford and other top business schools for a number of media publications around the world. I also get to host the Center Court MBA Festival with John Byrne from Poets and Quants, which gives me this wonderful opportunity to sit down with the Dean of Admissions, most recently Kirsten Moss, the Director of Outreach, Will Torres at the Stanford GSB. And if you do get the chance to check out those videos, they're as open and generous as my colleagues in everything that you should know about Stanford. The Fortuna team that I work with come from insider admissions expertise from all of the top business schools around the world. There are more than 40 of them at Stanford, of course, and the other M7 schools, Harvard, Wharton. We won't be talking about those 2 so much tonight. And the consultations that we offer with the team are the gold standard of the industry. We take the time to look at your resume, to look at your accomplishments, to look at the path, the choices that you've made to reach this point, to be applying to the world's top business schools. And those, we hope, will be really valuable and insightful sessions. So please, once we're done talking about Stanford today, we hope that you will sign up for your own individual consultation. I mentioned being joined by insider expertise, and I'm delighted to welcome Heidi Hillis, Tatiana Nemo, and Rachel Erickson. Heidi is one of our senior expert coaches at Fortuna, is a Stanford GSB alumna, and a former GSB interviewer, as is Tatiana. In fact, they shared the classrooms on the Palo Alto campus, both wonderful experiences, and bring similarly that former admissions experience working with interviews. Rachel Erickson's another Stanford MBA, incredibly proud of the institution that she knows so well, and a remarkable storyteller with part of her background in publishing. We'll be talking about storytelling as we go through this session. It's the first in 3 that we're holding over the coming weeks. These masterclasses through the spring. We'll be looking at the 7 essentials for Harvard Business School next Thursday at the same time. That's noon on the East Coast, much later in Mumbai and Dubai. And then a week after that, the 7 things you need to know about getting into the Wharton School. The Fortuna website has an enormous amount of research that we've put together over the last 10 years with all sorts of insights, videos about recommenders, the GMAT and the GRE, just everything that will be useful. But we're going to get started, and in breaking it down to just 7 essentials, we're going to start with the idea of being authentic. Now, when the Dean of Stanford, John Levin, was made Dean of the Year by Poets and Quants, John Byrne wrote about an individual that had a deep well of humility and a quiet self-confidence to go with that. Perhaps that's a good segue, I hope, Heidi, for this first discussion point about being yourself.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I think that this is, probably we're going to go through a lot of these different tips. And I think this is a theme that will kind of repeat over and over, that Stanford really wants to get to kind of beyond the resume and really to know who you are, what makes you you, what makes you different. The Stanford application, compared to all the other applications for business schools, is the most comprehensive, I would say. It has the most essays. You have a lot of kind of word count throughout the application to really be able to highlight all sorts of different aspects of your background. And so I think, we'll get into some details about the different types of the essays, but that main iconic, what means the most to you and why essay is really an opportunity to answer that question and to get to really help the school understand who you are as a person. I think with over 6,000, close to 7,000 sometimes applications, it's easy to wonder how you can actually show that kind of authenticity. But it's important to think about, I think, when you have so many people applying, everybody has a different story. And the key is to make sure that yours is unique, right? And that can be really difficult. And we can talk a little bit about, how you kind of think about going on beyond kind of the top line and getting to that depth that you need to show that. But people come to me and say things like, oh, I've read that the GSB really likes candidates who are X or Y. That's, I think, a real signal that you need to kind of stop and rethink, because what works for someone else is not necessarily going to work for you. That's the key here, is that you really need to have an application and essay strategy that is unique to you. And so I think that it's a really wonderful opportunity to do the type of self-reflection that most of us don't really do in our day-to-day lives. And the application really pushes you to do that. And as you go deeper and as you really try to answer those questions, it becomes much more about, what is the difference that makes you you? I think everybody, having read hundreds of these essays, it's really easy to tell when between the people who've actually done the hard work and actually answer those questions versus those who are trying to kind of, I would say, second guess what the GSB wants to hear. The GSB wants to hear who you are. And so trying to answer that question authentically and genuinely is really important. So, the main essays, the main essay, I would say, what means the most to you and why, is really designed to do that. And I think that if you tackle all those GSB essays to begin with, it really gives you such a broad sense of all of your accomplishments, and you really can generate a lot of incredible material that becomes really useful for other applications as well.
Right. When we sit down with Kirsten Moss, with Will Torres, with other senior members of the GSB admissions team, they say what a lovely moment it is welcoming the incoming class, but how often they hear from admits that are about to start their GSB experience, I nearly didn't apply. I just didn't think that I'd have, the story to share that would capture attention. I mean, Rachel, I suppose this is part of it, of everybody has a unique and a distinct story to share. And trusting the admissions office to do all of that hard work to really understand the person that lies behind it.
Yes, I agree. I think what Heidi's talked about, it really is important to get beyond that an initial perspective. And I think that I often find people, they look on paper exactly like everybody else. You don't know anything different about them. It's like, oh, it's another investment banker, it's another consultant, fine. And then you hear what they have to say and you hear what they write. And there's something really genuine and authentic and wonderful there. And that always resonates with me. And I think that it often also can resonate with the admissions committee when they feel that.
To reinforce the point, Tatiana, that Heidi made about people trying to calculate what Stanford wants to hear. In fact, Kirsten, when she first accepted the position, she said to me, Matt, in the first year, I'm going to try to read every essay. I was like, are you nuts? There are over 7,000 of this. What matters most to you and why? But it is a place that the GSB starts just to get that deeper sense of authenticity and self.
Absolutely. And I think what they're looking for is this information that it's going to be very hard to find on a resume. It's going to be very hard to find on the quantitative mark of your GMAT score or your GPA. What they want to know is what is driving you and what's motivating you. And that is what's going to make it personal and unique, and the type of information that's going to be very difficult to infer from anywhere else in the application. So those are the things I think that they're looking for, that texture that makes exactly your ambition and your sense of self kind of come to the forefront of your application.
Right. Well, the GSB has a 6.3% admissions selectivity. That makes it the most selective MBA program on the planet. We talk at Fortuna, Heidi, about enjoying this opportunity, the mirror that's being held up, and to take this deep dive, to go further beyond bullet points to the resume, to really uncover the stories, the characteristics that lie behind them.
Yes, like I said, I think before, I loved how Tatiana talked about texture. I think that that's a great word when you talk about it. It's really kind of getting beyond just the kind of the surface, and going deep is hard. It can be really hard. It can be, but it's actually not maybe as hard as you would think. I think when you think about that iconic essay, that what means the most to you and why, I think there's a secret that I often tell my clients, that it's not so much the what is important, right? It is ultimately you kind of need to kind of articulate the what, but at the end of the day, you know, there aren't that many different whats. I mean, there are certain things that mean something to people. It's your family, it's your having impact, supporting one another, never giving up, maybe something to do with your career vision, maybe it has something to do with, the climate space or financial inclusion. These are all things that you're not going to be really unique in the what, but the why is really where you get into the uniqueness. And that, so if, for example, if your what is financial inclusion, you really think it's important that everybody has access to financial tools to better themselves, that's great. But that's not so unique. What is unique is the why. Why is that important to you? Where did that come from? Is it because of a story, something personal that happened to you? Perhaps your family went through something. Your father lost his job at some point, and you really realized what it is to have no access to the financial system. Or maybe it's that you worked with a colleague who never would go to the happy hours with you, and you realized that it was because she was putting her sister through college and didn't have the funds to do that. So, it's trying to find those stories. And this is where I think, we talk a lot at Fortuna when we work with people about, not showing, not telling. So you can kind of have an understanding of what you want to get across to the admissions committee, but usually the best way to do that is through a story. So finding those personal moments, those stories that really illustrate and show rather than tell what is important to you, and where that comes from, and those stories, weaving those stories together and really putting them into a cohesive kind of narrative of why you are who you are, how these stories have shaped you. And so it can be really daunting, I think, at first to kind of try to tackle that essay. You can really start to think about the people, the experiences that really shaped you, and then start to ask yourself questions. So you might, again, start with a story of something that kind of really stuck with you from childhood that had a big impression on you, and think about, okay, so what was it about that story that made me, change or think a different way? You tell the story to yourself, and then you kind of ask yourself, so what? What does it mean? How did you feel at the time? How did you change your behavior going forward? Why did you make a decision after that might have been different? Try to really do that reflection and understand how these stories really affected you. I think that another common mistake that people make is trying to go really broad in that first essay. You only have 650 words. You can't tell your whole life story. It's impossible. And if you try to do that, all you're going to get is a very surface level type of essay. So I really advise people to think about 1, 2, maybe 3 different experiences that really shape them, and link them together and really help to understand how those really created the person that you are today. Sometimes people have a hard time kind of finding those stories. And a lot of times people will come to me and say, nothing really happened to me that is really dramatic. They have this misconception that you have to have overcome some incredible obstacle to be able to write about that in your essay. And of course, there are those people. There are people who have overcome certain difficulties in their life, or have had a really unique experience. But most people don't. Most people are kind of, they've done the right things. They've gone to the right schools. Maybe they've studied really hard. They've worked really hard to get where they are. They're, in a career that's been really challenging. And yes, they've kind of overcome some difficulties, but not much more than anybody else, right? It's not something that they feel like is unique. But I think it's everybody has something. I remember working with a woman who she was really struggling with this as well, because it's it's hard to kind of, she would say, I've done all these things. I've gone, went to school, did well, got a job in banking right out of school, has been doing really well. I haven't really overcome anything. But as we talked, kind of went deeper, it really became obvious that her thing was overcoming her own self-confidence, lack of self-confidence. So we really worked on that. And the essay that we came up with later was really focused on, that inner dialogue that she would have and overcoming her own inner critic. So this is not something that, maybe would have jumped out of the page or jumped out of her resume to begin with. But as you work deeper and think about how it is that you came to where you are, what are the things that you did have to overcome, even if they weren't, having to, you weren't a refugee or you weren't persecuted for something. It's, you certainly have a story to tell. And I think that's the key here, is that everybody does have one.
Right. I mean, Rachel, in perhaps not a networking session, but ask a young professional, tell me about yourself. They might secretly admit to an allegiance to a particular British football club, but maybe not this week. Otherwise, it might be what a job title at the school that they graduated from. But it is this sense of going beyond the resume and those titles to really understand choices that people have made, the passions that have emerged, that awareness or introspection.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think what Heidi said really resonated with me, that I had a client, same thing, sort of a normal background, and was actually someone who was concerned about being financially stable, and had some valid reasons for it, and wrote about that honestly, and then wrote about some of the things that bothered him in the finance industry. And it was very much not a do-gooder essay about, I want to change the world. It was really about his personal concerns and things that he felt needed to be better. And it is that follow your passion. I think sometimes that was when we were applying. I think that a lot of times we were told, follow your passion, write about your passion, and don't lose that. Like, yes, you want to think about the bigger impact, but you do also want to think about how it relates to what you genuinely care about and what you genuinely love.
Right. So here's the candidate voice. All of this is complemented, Tatiana, by the choice of recommenders. And here we've placed the emphasis in choosing recommenders wisely, those that have seen your growth. Well, why the emphasis on growth?
Yes, and I'm personally very passionate about the recommendation letters, because I feel that everything in the application form is relevant, but solid recommendation letters can be quite pivotal in the impact ultimately of the outcome. And the reason why we want to always go for recommenders that have seen your growth, that have been invested in your growth, that have seen you perform, is because the admissions committee wants to stay completely away of fan letters. There is no level of affirmation or of exaltation of who you are that is going to have any impact if it comes without evidence, because they are going for the evidence. They're going for the instances, the anecdotes, the examples where you have manifested certain leadership behaviors. They want to see, how good are you with your strategic thinking? How are you focused on results? How about team leadership? How about forming partnerships? How are you as a communicator, and do you develop yourself and do you develop others? All these things and all these behaviors, they want evidence of that. So specific examples, they have to come from someone that has been directly involved with you. We can't go for the individual that has heard through the grapevine or through third parties how you have performed. This has to come firsthand from someone that not only has seen you, but that they have had the intention to get involved in your growth. They have provided feedback, and they can attest to the fact of how you consume that feedback and how you translate that into action. Because they're also going for the evidence, not so much of how you learn from an academic perspective, there they have it from the GPA and the GMAT. They need to know, how do you learn from others? How do you interact with others? And so that piece of feedback is very key. So if we can choose, a set of recommenders that they have been very involved in who we are and how we have performed, even if they don't have tremendous organizational ascendance or a shiny title, that is going to be far more meaningful than going for maybe the shiny title, but let's say the empty calories in talking about your worth and your impact and how you have performed. Another thing that's important is they're always going to go for evidence of your personal journey. So again, let's take all the shiny objects out of the equation and let's just go for the authentic direction of travel and, like that overall impact, that's going to come from that personal journey.
Mm. This idea with all of the pieces of the admissions puzzle, Tatiana, we spoke initially about the essays to ensure that there's a level of coherence or that everything fits together. Do you recommend working closely with recommenders and perhaps sharing what you were thinking of sharing in your essays so that they can then focus on other things and bring those other characteristics to the attention of the admissions office?
I mean, generally the way that I approach every single candidate that I work with is wherever we need to accentuate or provide more emphasis, I think it allows for certain things to show both on the essays and the recommendation letters, if the situation there's room for that. In other cases, making sure that we are using every single piece of real estate for the application, so that we can provide as complete a mosaic, of experiences and situations. And so leveraging very wisely and strategically, what are you going to be portraying in the essay and what are you going to be emphasizing on the letters of recommendation. Hence our, like the Fortuna methodology in putting together a recommenders brief, so that it's not just the reaching out and asking someone to be your recommender, but providing them with some context and some elements, that it's going to be easier for you to remember what were the instances, the projects, the moments in which you portrayed whatever behavior was portrayed, and then including that in the recommenders brief. The recommender ultimately is going to write whatever, like the recommender thinks best, but it's always good to provide a little bit of that upfront.
Right. Rachel, a lot of applicants that maybe, have the McKinsey, Bain, BCG background or Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Google and Meta, they could have been at that company for 2 or 3 years and instinctively think of 2 recommenders from the same company. But at the same time, before they started that banking career, they went and taught for a year. Maybe they were a ski instructor in Europe, who knows? Is there, do you think, the scope to say, well, yeah, I could have another voice from the bank, but they might say the same sort of things, whereas there was this other very distinct experience that I had after college, and how that could shed new light on the applicant?
So I have to say there are no hard and fast rules here because every situation is so individual. I've had clients who both of the recommendations were from the same company and they'd only been there a year. I've had clients who do that. They choose one from the first job, one from their second job. I've had clients where one is a professional and then another one is a different setting. And it really depends on your particular circumstances. So what you want to think about is who is going to not just thinks you're a great, awesome person, but be able to advocate for you in the way that business schools care about, and who is going to really understand your leadership qualities and have seen those and focus on those people and choose people who can do that. I think that's the best way to think about it.
Now we're focusing on 7 questions. I'd like to introduce an 8th question. We haven't reached the end yet. And I call it the GSB tiramisu question. Tatiana, when I asked Kirsten Moss, we imagine making an incredible Italian dessert, hence the tiramisu. The analogy was to the key ingredients that the GSB is looking for, the mascarpone and the chocolate powder on the top. And the response, it's a recorded video that our viewers can find, is an extraordinarily thoughtful indicator of the sort of things. And the word that comes up more than any other, impact, again and again, from all of the GSB team. Why this emphasis on impact?
And yes, I mean, this is, again, another piece of the application that it's quite motivating for me, because they are, of course, they're going to be seeking some evidence that you have demonstrated some academic stamina. You can withhold, heavy programs. You have demonstrated that you can put yourself at the top, in terms of results. But if you're just doing for doing's sake, there's, you can't quite feel that sense of purpose. You can't quite feel that thirst for impact. And that is an ingredient that they definitely are looking for. So that it's not just doing for doing's sake. It's not just pursuing for the sake of pursuing a goal. I mean, there's a sense of purpose, there's a sense of direction, and there's a desire to have an impact. And so all of that, they're going to be seeking throughout the whole application. So for instance, on the resume, they want to see that there is some sense of growth, some trajectory in which you have, regardless of what your starting point is. Again, the direction of travel is precisely that of wanting to have influence, to leave a mark, to ultimately have that impact. They give you an opportunity to expand on that a little bit more on the optional essays that Rachel is going to be talking about a little later. And again, they want to understand what is the motivation, what is the igniter behind your actions, what is it that you're seeking. And so that's why, it's in how you have gained traction, how you have gained momentum, how you have transformed things, because ultimately this is a situation in which we're going to be going for, changing lives, changing organizations, and changing the world. And, to achieve that, there needs to be an intention behind your actions. There needs to be that sense of purpose. And that's very difficult to observe or to infer. That's something that, needs to be kind of dug down, introspected, and offered. So that's what they're going for. And again, they're going to look for that, through, again, resume, through letters of recommendation as well. What impact have you had on the individuals that are recommending you? And then ultimately those three beautiful examples that they're giving you some space to elaborate on, to talk about what not only has motivated you, but what has been the outcome and the result of that.
Right. Heidi, Tatiana's brought up change lives, change organizations, change the world, this iconic statement to define the GSB. It can be intimidating to some because they think, oh, change lives, what is expected? I have to have come up with some drug that saved 450,000 people, but it can be more granular, and the impact that you've had can be measured in more modest ways.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point. And I think that that's something that is important as you go through the exercise of trying to identify what stories can really highlight your impact that either you or your recommender can tell. It is important to think really broadly about that. I mean, Stanford has a grid that they ask your recommenders to rate you on. There's, I think, 11 different leadership qualities, and each of those has 5 different levels. And so there's a big range. They really have a very, it's not rocket science here. You don't know, it's very clear what they're looking for. You can see that in the grid. You can kind of it's helpful to go through it yourself and really rate yourself and think really broadly about when you've had that kind of impact. For example, I think, people do, especially when you come from an industry where maybe you haven't had the opportunity to really lead a team or to be in charge of a major project. You're kind of, an analyst, you're working in a team, you're doing your piece. But you can really try to think really beyond kind of maybe what you would normally consider to be impact. I remember a really great example that I have from a client who's, we really worked with a recommender to find great examples that really showed how they differed from their peers. Again, this is when you're talking about the recommendations and all through the application, but specifically the recommendations, I would say it's about showing that impact, but also how your impact is above and beyond what was required or different from what your peer group might have shown. And so something as small as, this person was always the person who remembered everybody's birthday and brought a present every, or organized the birthday cake or something. It's that person who was kind of the glue in the team, that it wasn't that she was, the leader of the team so much, but really the person that made that team gel and everybody kind of came together. And the impact of that team being more united was very clear with the better outcome for the client that they had. So I think it's important to think, beyond just what you would think of, this, I closed this deal, or I, whatever it is. It's important to think of those more subtle examples, and that can come from outside of work as well. I mean, you mentioned before, about having recommenders from outside of work. That is definitely a possibility, especially if, for example, your work is in consulting or banking, or even in the tech industry, where again you're working very closely on a team, but you don't necessarily have the opportunity for a lot of impact. Perhaps outside of work, you have had the opportunity for impact. You're on the board of some nonprofit in your local neighborhood, or in your community, and you've organized their fundraiser and raised the most amount that they've ever raised in a year. Those are really important things to think about. I had a client who every year would lead a tour with her church to a specific place, and she had done it over years and years and years. And we used one of the church leaders as her recommender, who was very different from her Goldman recommender. And so that gave a really different perspective to who this person was. And so I think, thinking broadly about what impact means is also important.
Right. With all of these, Tatiana has talked about the real estate of the application, and maybe these are some of the sort of the bigger picture ideas. But then drilling down further, Rachel, looking at the details, and so maybe that gives you the chance to bring in certain other aspects of the application and why they can be so important.
Yes. So I think Tatiana mentioned this, that you need to think of the application, which is the application form itself, which includes those impact essays and a background essay, the resume, the letters of recommendation, and the essays as the package. And when you put all of those pieces together, the admissions committee needs to have a complete picture of you. But at the same time, it's going to be all these pieces in all these different places. And so it's really important when you're working specifically on the application, for example, to think about how that application fits with the rest of your package. So for example, you don't want to be repetitive. If you're talking about an extracurricular, both on the application and in your resume, you need to make sure that you're highlighting something slightly different about it, giving the reader new information in both places, that you're not just copying and pasting, really kind of taking the time to think about that, because as massive as the Stanford application seems, it actually is still limited real estate, and you want to make sure that every single thing that you do shows you and takes advantage of the space to give as much information as possible about you to them. Another thing that's really important to do is to make sure that things are clear. So where do things fit in this puzzle? This is the what happened when. And you don't want the reader reading your application and being confused. The additional information essay is actually a great space to clear this up. So maybe you had a dip in your GPA one year that you need to explain what was going on in your personal life, or you come from a country that doesn't send a lot of applicants to business school, and so you're not sure that they're going to understand how to read your university transcript, or you might also have had a gap in your work experience and you need to give a little bit more detail, or overlapping jobs and you need to explain, like, why are both these jobs with the same dates. And you want to explain that so that the reader really understands and isn't confused at the end about what's going on. And then you also want to take the opportunity to say why and explain your choices. And the reason for leaving is a part of the application that can be very useful for that. People sometimes just kind of forget about that, but that's a really valuable place to just briefly and concisely mention what it is that that you're looking for in your next opportunity, what it is that you're seeking, where you want to grow and how you want to grow. So take advantage of that. Then I do also really want to talk about these background and impact essays, because they're unique to the Stanford application and they are so important. And they give you just it's an incredible opportunity. They are giving you an opportunity to literally directly advocate for yourself with the admissions committee what you have done that is amazing and why you are an awesome person who deserves to be let into Stanford. And so they technically say they're optional, but obviously take advantage of them. And just when you're writing them, think about writing them in very clear, plain English, making the story something that anyone can understand, thinking about explaining what happened, what the issues were, how you did it, and then ultimately why it mattered. Like, why should the reader care about this? And that relates back to that impact. I also want to touch on one other aspect that we haven't talked about yet, which is the background essay. There's a background question that this year was the very first question Stanford asked you. And once again, think hard about that, because they are giving you at the very beginning of the entire application package an opportunity to really share something important and fundamental about who you are. And that is going to inform the entire rest of the application and how they read it. So take advantage of that opportunity too, and really pay attention to that aspect.
And with details, Tatiana, everybody in that GSB office, they're focused on admissions. So admitting people, not rejecting them. As we think about awards that you might have, a publication that you co-authored, finding the balance between all of the details that Rachel has talked us through and the essentials on that form, and then the rest of the application. Should we sort of say, well, they know about the award, they know about the sales results that I generated in 18 months in the Latin American market, and then sort of move to other stories in the essays so that everything fits together?
Definitely. And I think, I have had the situation in which, for instance, with a certain applicant, they have an incredibly long list of extracurriculars, like all these other volunteer instances in which they have been engaged. It's important to approach these not as an inventory or a laundry list. There has to be some curation of the bits and pieces that are going to be incorporated. So in listing the awards, in listing the extracurriculars, in making sure that this all comes to be, I think having that kind of that common thread that is going to stem from what matters most to you, like just as Rachel was making reference right now to the background mini essay, that's going to be directly linked, with what matters most to you, because that's going to come from what has shaped you, who have been kind of those role models, what have been those pivotal moments in your timeline that have made you who you are today. And so in uncovering that, in unearthing that, in finding that backbone, then you can start bringing in all the other elements, that it doesn't have to be an overtly produced situation in which everything mixes and matches. But, like there needs to be some cadence and some rhyme and rhythm to all the bits and pieces that we're incorporating.
Right. And then as we've submitted that application, round 1, round 2, possibly round 3, we hope to get an invitation to interview. I often think with interviews, you're so eager at this point, to show what a great candidate you are, that you might go too far and draw everybody back to the description of the dean, John Levin, and a deep well of humility. Humility is one of the elements perhaps that you might have looked to pick up on, Rachel, in an interview, but how do you really shine and maximize this great opportunity?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to just give a little bit of reassurance that I always tell people when they've gotten an interview, which is that most of the people who get an interview do a very good job. It is not about a ranking. It really is about giving the interviewer and also the school additional context, additional information about the things that you've done, how you did them, what you really are like in the workforce, how you lead, how you inspire people. All of that nuance is the important part. The Stanford interview is a behavioral interview. It is a pretty strict interview where they really focus on behavioral questions. And those are typically things like, tell me about a time when you did X, Y, or Z on a project. And then they also ask a lot of follow-on questions, and you should be prepared for this. For the follow-on questions and for the interruptions, these are totally normal because they, once again, Stanford really wants to get deep with you. You may just focus on a couple of examples or even one example during this interview, one story, one thing you've done if you've had a really big project that you've been working on, but you're going to go into incredible depth on that story. One of the other things I do want to emphasize, because sometimes people prepare for these interviews by being like, okay, these are my talking points and this is what I need to get across. And that is so not the way to approach the Stanford interview. It's really about the conversation, and it's about listening to what the interviewer is asking you and being in the moment with them, and really know what your experience is, know what you've done that you're proud of, know what you've done that's been difficult or challenging where you've been successful, but then just listen to the questions, listen to what they're talking about, and have that conversation with them about what you've done. And I think that's really the best way to approach the interview and to get the most out of it. And also for your then interviewer to really be able to get a sense of who you are so that they can write a great write-up for you for the school.
Right. And Heidi, having conducted many GSB interviews, how much detail do you have about the individual for them to then judge what they would need to share with you for context?
Yeah, I think that that's an important question because, the Stanford interview is different. A lot of the schools have different interview formats, and Stanford's is also different in the sense it is an alumni interviewer. They will only have your resume. They will not have seen the rest of your application. And so there's a kind of a way to think about this. First of all, is they're not, the alumni interview is not making any decisions. They are not the person who's saying yes or no to you. They are writing a report about your interview and submitting it to the admissions committee. I always tell my clients that you have to think of it this way, their job is really to be your advocate. So your job is to help them be your advocate. So give them, again, going back to what we talked about before, details, experiences. You want to give them stories that they can then write up and send in. They now these stories, it's kind of a balance because some, Stanford's application is incredibly comprehensive. So you might have already told most of these stories in the application. So if you do want to repeat the stories, going back to kind of your leadership examples, that knowing what the school is looking for from that grid, you can really start to add a little bit of color in some of these, in the examples that you would be giving in the behavioral interview. So as Rachel mentioned, it's typically, tell me about time when you faced a roadblock. So you think you have an example, it's a good one because it has kind of highlights different leadership qualities. Go into some depth, talk about what the thought process that you had going through that, how you kind of approach that problem. Be prepared to talk in some depth about it and allow those details to really seep into the conversation, because those are the details, again, that the recommender will be writing back to this admissions committee, which become really important. So you want to give them really clear evidence of your leadership in the interview. And again, it's not a difficult interview. It's, what to expect. So preparing for it is incredibly important. But then, as Rachel said, kind of there's a kind of a line between over preparing and being a natural interviewee. So I advise, prepare, and then forget it. Kind of, you have those stories in your subconscious, you know them, but really listen to the question might come differently than you had expected. And so really try to be thoughtful about how you answer the question. But those stories that you have in your wheelhouse are really, are going to be your best advocate for yourself.
Right.
I just want to jump in and say that what Heidi mentioned, the interviewer is looking for the best of you, and they are doing everything they can during the course of the interview to give you the opportunity to show you at your best. So you don't want to worry about like, oh no, I didn't answer that thing perfectly. It's really not about that. It's about if you did do something great and then you are able to show that at some point during the interview, that's what they're going to report back. It is not, it's not a gotcha interview. It's really meant to help you shine.
Right. In the Why Stanford essay, I want to take the touchy-feely course. Well, you and 7,131 other applicants to the program, connecting with the school, being able to really show some deeper level of understanding of its culture, the personality, the different opportunities. But I think if you memorized every page of the website, that might actually turn them off. Tatiana, in terms of, here we are in March, round one, deadlines that are 6 months away. How can we really make the most of connecting with the school, with students and alumni to gain deeper insight into the GSB?
Yeah, definitely, Matt. And I mean, on this particular point, I like to separate two elements. Like there's the element of packaging and sending the application with the best content possible, with like that set of elements and information and insights and everything that's going to position you strongly vis-a-vis other applicants. But then there's that other element in terms of saying, I am also making a decision. No, the school is going to make a decision if I'm in or not, but I'm also making a decision, where is it that I'm going to be at my best? Because generally when you perform at your best is in places where you feel you belong, you fit, you're happy, you're content, your gut is telling you that you are where you need to be. And so in connecting with the school, I think it's this exploration of identifying if the alum that I just talked to, the person that graduated 10, 15 years or just a year ago, do I feel a connection? Do I like this person? No, is there kind of an easiness of how this conversation is happening? Do I appreciate the values? Do I appreciate, like just how this other person is coming across? As I walk through campus, is this a place that I see myself being engaged in? No, is this the right weather? Is this the right vibe? Is the organizational culture something that is, kind of energizing me? All of these elements that you cannot consume from a pamphlet or a website, these are bits and pieces that are key. You're going to be investing a lot of money, a lot of time. You're going to be, like ideally derailing your career for a higher return. But all in all, it's like, it's time of your life. So you need to be demanding in finding the place that's going to be, the best fit for you, both from a cultural perspective in terms of the school, how you experience the place, all the elements, that are relevant, weather, campus, all of that. And then more importantly, those idiosyncrasies and personalities and individuals that in fact you're going to be experiencing 2 years with while at the school, but then for the rest of your life, you're going to be interacting with that huge body of alums. So in that regard is that I feel that connecting with the school and getting to know more about the school, it should be to your benefit in terms of where immediately you're going to get the the knowledge, the insight, but then how is this going to be a very bountiful backdrop of your experience? And engaging physically with the school through the alums or the actual visit, I think it's like invaluable information for you to make a decision.
Right. We talked, Rachel, earlier for recommenders that it's not just a fan club, real insight, and equally for conversations with students or alums, it's not a popularity contest, right? It's not because you spoke to 27 Stanford MBAs before you applied to the program. What is your guidance for meaningful and perhaps rewarding connections with students and alumni that our viewers could consider?
So I think helping to understand what is unique about Stanford that is relevant to you and to what you have done, but more importantly, what you want to do. And talking with the alumni or the students about the things that you really care about learning, the areas where you want to grow, it is a way to get beyond that surface and actually genuinely get something out of those conversations. Because no, it's not about meeting 17 people. That doesn't matter at all. It's about understanding how Stanford will help you and accomplish the things that you have said that you want to do.
Right.
Yeah, I would just add there, I think it's really important when you go into these interactions to be really clear with yourself about why you're applying to business school. So, this is a work that you would kind of do before, but really having a very robust career vision and an understanding of what you are hoping to accomplish. And then it's often trying to then use those opportunities to find really specific, a specific understanding or information about how the school will help you to achieve those. So, you have the Why Stanford essay, which we haven't talked about in a huge amount of depth, but is also incredibly important. And so really this connection, the information that you're gathering from these types of interactions are going to feed into that essay. So how is Stanford going to help you achieve those goals? What are your goals, first of all? And secondly, then once you have that articulated, how do you, use this particular experience? So that you can learn a lot from the website, you can learn a lot from the webinars, you can go but going and visiting and talking to people really does help you get to that kind of next layer of kind of information or subtlety that can really kind of make a difference in that particular essay. So you mentioned, I love it, touchy-feely. I mean, I think 90% of people who write in that essay mention that in the first draft, at least. So it's okay, that's fine if that is really something that's important to you, but it's not something you just want to throw in. Everybody can talk a bit that they want to do, that they want to take part in touchy-feely, but can you relate it to why that's important to you? So for example, if your goal is to become an investor who is going to be working with a lot of startups, showing some understanding of, okay, to be able to interact with a lot of different types of people from different backgrounds and actually really deliver hard information in difficult circumstances, you need to have certain skills. And that's why touchy-feely is that relevant for you, because you know that you lack those skills or you haven't had enough experience. So you really need to make it personal. You cannot just mention something about the school that says, I really like the fact that, you can go on a GMIX, which is a semester or an internship, an international internship. Great. But why is that relevant? So you're really working with an alum to say, okay, you went on a GMIX. What did that get you? What did you learn from that experience that really, was unique, that you think that was really helpful in your future career? And trying to get those little nuggets and elements that that will help you to show that you really both understand what the school offers, but also how it will help you achieve your goals and relate it directly to your goals.
Right. I was reminded in our most recent hosting of the GSB, the outreach director reminded me, he said, tiramisu, very often the best tiramisu is messy. Now, whether there are things that need to be explained in that optional essay, or whether the challenge that you faced at work that you then emerged to have real impact, as Tatiana was describing, or those layers that we're working through to really be able to share the deeper you. We've managed to cover so much in the last 55 minutes. For all of these subjects, on the Fortuna website, we have got videos and recordings and archive materials that are dedicated to the interviews, that are dedicated to the essays, that look at the resume, that look at researching the school, getting the most out of a campus visit. Tatiana did mention the good weather in Palo Alto. So we hope that as we've come through these 7 key topics, it will give you a place to start. And then when we pick up on that consultation call with you, messy or not, we're here to really explore all of the different themes that we've looked at today for the GSB. And how you could start to shape and put together that story. Bear in mind, everyone, I think, has emphasized the time, the introspection, and all of my colleagues, you can really tell when someone has taken that time, has stepped back to put together materials. Here we are in March with Stanford's round 1 deadline 6 months away. So time to get started on this wonderful journey of reflection. So we hope that you'll set up a call with myself, with my colleagues very, very soon. And of course, join us next week for the next masterclass on Harvard Business School and the week following on Wharton. So it just leaves me to thank Rachel, to thank Tatiana and Heidi for sharing so much insight. As you got a sense, they talk about clients that they've loved working with and the difference that they've made to them sharing those stories. Thank you to all 3 of you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.